Hello, at 1,000 subscribers, I will make a special series of stories for you. The country between Dry Creek and the distant blue wall of the ranges looked like it had been hammered flat and left to bake. Tom Grady rode through it with a steady seat, his patched coat flapping at the shoulders, the reins laid slack over his mare's neck. He had a bedroll, a coffee pot wired to his saddle horn, a tin of beans, and one stubborn dream that had followed him from job to job like a burr in his sock: own a piece of land that answered to him, and no one else. By the time he reached Dry Creek, the sun had gone copper, turning dust into a gauze that caught at his throat. The town was a squat run of false fronts livery, general store, smithy, one church, 2 saloons. He tied up at the quieter saloon, the one with no piano, and pushed in through the batwings. Inside, cards slapped wood, a fly worried at a half-peeled orange, and 2 cowhands leaned their foreheads together in the slow way men fight when they're too tired to care much about winning. Tom took a corner table. He drank water first and whiskey second. When the barkeep Lahoma, with hair like a spilled box of matches, came by, he asked if she'd heard tell of a place called Stonewater. Stonewater? She raised one brow. You mean the mine camp up in the basin? Ain't much left, but wind and ghosts, far as I hear. From the next table, a freckled stage driver chimed in without looking up. Ghosts and long, mean memories. They had a rush, then a run of bad luck, then a fire that took the breath out of the whole basin. Folks quit Stonewater like a man drops a snake. Who owns it? Tom asked. County claims it through back taxes, Lahoma said. Anybody can buy a headache if they're set on it. That night he slept in the livery loft, listening to the horses blow and stamp below, and put numbers to his dream. He counted the miles to the basin, counted the feed left in his sack, counted the money he had saved, 2 5s in paper, 80 in gold coin, and the rest made up with a handful of nickels and pride. In the dark, he could see fences where none stood, a windmill turning, a garden patch under a window. He told himself he wasn't a boy anymore to be dreaming, and then dreamed anyway. The county land office stood at the quiet end of Main Street, a place of ledgers, dust, and someone else's careful handwriting. The clerk wore an ink stain on his cuff like a medal, and introduced himself as Barnaby Finch. He slid his wire spectacles up his nose and gave Tom the kind of dry smile a man uses when he expects to be disappointed. What can the county do for you this morning? Finch asked. Looking to buy the deed to Stonewater, Tom said. Finch snorted softly. That is not so much a deed as a bundle of inconveniences. The mine company's folded. The last assessment went unpaid. Structures are in disrepair. There are, ghosts, Tom said, deadpan. Rumors, Finch corrected, though his mouth twitched. He fetched a ledger the size of a family Bible and opened it to a page covered in neat columns. The basin town site and certain tracts around it reverted to the county last winter. We offered it at auction in March. No bids. You could settle the arrears and fees. The county board authorized me to convey title for a nominal sum if anyone was so motivated. What's the nominal sum? Finch looked over his spectacles. $100. Tom felt the figure hit him like a small, contained thunderclap. 100 for a hole framed in dream? He could see it. Use the abandoned structures to start a small herd, turn the livery into a barn, the mercantile into a tool shed. And if the basin carried even a trickle of decent water, he could scrape by through the first season. Might even turn profit by calving time if he worked from before dawn to after dark, and nothing broke bad. Any claims on it? He asked. Any. Folks living up there still? Not that the county recognizes, Finch said, tapping the ledger. But a deed is paper, Mr. Grady. Tom Grady. A deed is paper, Mr. Grady, not a pistol. If you find squatters, You'll need to come to some accommodation, or the sheriff will, if you insist. Finch lifted his eyes. I advise accommodation. It's cheaper. Tom set his roll of bills and coins on the desk. He didn't peel it slow. He didn't pinch a nickel. He counted it plain and fast. Finch did the same, ticking the numbers with a pencil and making a small, satisfied sound when they balanced. Finch drew up the deed on thick paper that had the scent of starch and thyme. He dripped wax, pressed the county seal, and handed Tom a document with a ceremony that belonged to weddings and funerals. Stonewater town site and appurtenant properties, Finch read, such as they are. I'll also provide a plat map. Mind you, it's older than my spectacles and about as trustworthy. Comes with the steeple? Tom asked, half grinning. If it's still standing, Finch said. If it falls on you, the county does not guarantee the quality of the collapse. They shook hands, Finch's palm dry, Tom's rough, and that was that. Tom walked out, into the daylight, with a deed rolled and tied in red ribbon, a name for the windmill he hadn't built yet, and $100 fewer to weigh him down. He spent most of what was left on the kind of supplies you buy when you intend to make a place live again. Nails by the pound, a small keg of cut spikes, a spool of barbed wire, a camp saw, a sack of flour, a paper twist of baking soda, coffee, beans, and salt, a coil of new rope, a tin of axle grease, a lantern and 2 spare chimneys, lamp oil, a packet of vegetable seeds that promised more than they could deliver, cartridges to remind coyotes about boundaries, and a cheap harmonica to put against the long evenings. Lahoma wrapped his sugar tight in brown paper and gave him a penny peppermint with a smile that said she didn't think he'd be back soon. And she meant it kindly. Out behind the livery, he bartered for a pack mule with a chipped ear and the expression of a dignitary who had been thoroughly insulted by life. You'll like him, the hostler promised. He hates everyone equally. Tom named the mule Bishop, rolled his gear up tight, and set his saddle before sunup the next day. He tucked the deed inside his coat, over his shirt, as if it were a second heart. The trail to Stonewater climbed through Badlands and into a basin no map respected. He rode by landmarks, the snag of a lightning-struck cottonwood, a seam of red stone that jutted out like a broken tooth, a narrow arroyo the stage driver had called Hanging Woman because a cottonwood branch there had once held a man who didn't deserve mercy. He watered at a seep that hid beneath a thatch of grass, the kind of stingy spring that would keep a lizard alive and not much else. Clouds threw thin shadows that moved like rumors across the ground. Midday framed a set of telegraph poles like gray bones marching off over a low ridge. Their wires had been long since scavenged. Tom followed them on a hunch and came out on an old wagon trace cut into the slope, iron-rimmed scars frozen in the dirt, as if the last ore wagon had just rolled by and might return if the mountain forgave. At dot by late afternoon, the air sharpened and the land opened. He topped a swell and saw the basin, a shallow dish cupped in the palm of the hills, with buildings scattered like the teeth of a comb dropped on the ground. The windmill stood crooked, vanes arrested at 1 o'clock, a twig of sky poked through. The bent church steeple like a splinter. A run of clapboard fronts leaned together, holding each other up out of habit. A bell hung in a frame, but no longer believed it had something to say. The sign out front had once read, "Welcome to Stonewater, Poppy, 611. Now the welcome hung sideways, and the 611 had been painted over and repainted until it looked like a math problem nobody wanted to solve. He reined in at the edge of town and listened. The first thing he heard was Bishop chewing in a thoughtful, disapproving way. The second was wind working through a loose plank somewhere, a flute note, thin and reedy. A jackrabbit started from behind a rain barrel and sprinted down the main street, like it had an appointment. Somewhere a hinge complained. Tom let his breath out slow. He rode the length of the street, past a barber's pole stripped of paint, past a mercantile with its windows gone to spiderweb, past a boarding-house porch that held 2 rockers and an old tin cup tipped on its side. He swung down at the livery, pushed the door, and spooked a cloud of swallows that boiled up, sudden and chattering, and were gone. The place still smelled of horses under the dust, a ghost of hay and sweat deep. In the boards. He walked through the stalls, counting them, trying to see what would be needed to make them useful again. A hammer lay near the door, not much rust on it. He picked it up, hefted it, set it back down. Outside, he checked the water trough. Dry. The pump handle moved with a stiff reluctance, but the leather in it might be coaxed to swell and hold. He filed a note in his head well seal needs repair, and moved on. At the mercantile, he found a length of stovepipe, dented but sound. He found a crate stamped with a San Francisco wholesaler's mark, the lettering still clear, though the crate itself had come apart along its nails. He found a poster advertising an Independence Day dance 3 summers ago, edges curled like old bark. He found, on the counter, a line of dust broken by a clean oval where a small jar had sat not long ago. That made the hair on his neck take notice. He told himself it was his own pawing around that had disturbed the place. He told himself lots of things. Still, he checked the floor for scuffs and saw a set of boot marks he hadn't made small. Careful feet turning on the heel rather than dragging. Not a miner's boots. A woman's, maybe. Or a boy's. County didn't say anything about neighbors, he said aloud, which did nothing to reduce the quiet. Behind the church, he found the cemetery, a scatter of wooden slats, some fallen, some standing straight in their faith. Names he didn't know, and 2 he did. Surnames that had been famous for a brief season in the newspapers when Stonewater's yield began and when it ended. He raised his hat and put it back on slow, the way his mother had taught him, and felt the weight of other people's hopes where the wind crossed the hill and didn't wait for him. On the rise beyond, the mine mouth yawned. The frame over it had blackened along one side and gone white where sun had cured it. The adit ran into the hill like a throat, cool air seeping out of it in a steady exhale. He didn't go closer, not then. He looked at it the way a man looks. At a river he intends to cross after he builds a bridge. He made a small camp at the edge of town, back of the livery where the wind couldn't whip his fire flat. He set the coffee to boil and ate beans with a crust of bread and kept his rifle leaned where his hand could find it without looking. Bishop stood hobbled a dozen steps away, ears pivoting like little signals to news Tom couldn't hear yet. He tried the harmonica and made 3 melancholy notes that even Bishop judged too sorrowful. He put it away with an embarrassed laugh. Evening lived longer in the basin than it did anywhere else. The sun rolled backward down the spine of the hills and set the windows on fire one by one, a last old glory for buildings that had spent too long staring into glare. When the light finally let go, it did so all at once, like a barroom crowd going quiet. That was when Tom smelled it, not the singed tang of his own coffee, not the acrid, faint burn that old boards carry in their bones. This was clean wood smoke, fresh as a morning chore. It came thin but sure on the breeze from the far side of town. He stood and turned his head until his eyes lined with the direction of the smell. The ridge moved against the sky, and a lone cottonwood by the creek fringe shaped itself out of the dark. There, among the lower shacks, a chimney breathed. Tom didn't move for a count of 10, the habit of a man who has learned patience with animals and people both. The smoke lifted in a pale ribbon, straight for a few feet before the wind took it and worried it apart. He buckled his gun belt, checked the rifle out of reflex, and told Bishop he'd be back shortly. The mule flicked one ear, which Tom took for consent, and maybe it was. He walked down the street with his boots quiet on. The hard pack, past the leaning fronts now turned to silhouettes, past the church whose bell frame made a question mark against the stars. The closer he came, the clearer the smoke grew, and the softer another sound metal on metal. A lid set on a pot, the kind of small domestic music that means a place has lived in dot at the edge of the basin, tucked against a fold in the earth, where the creek ran when the sky permitted it, stood a cabin he hadn't noticed in the day's glare. It wasn't one of the public buildings. It wasn't on Finch's Plat. It looked new in the ways that matter. Shingles still shedding rain, a door that had been plain to fit, a line of river stones piled neat beside the stoop. A dim glow pressed against the chinks between the logs and made the door's frame in two. A halo. Tom Grady, newest owner of Stonewater by the grace of a clerk's pen and his own stubborn hope, put his palm flat against the rough wood of the fence and felt it vibrating faintly with the life inside. He had bought a ghost town for $100. And a ghost town, it seemed, had sold him something extra. Out of the crooked chimney, a coil of smoke rose plain as a flag, ordinary as evening, and the sight of it caught him square in the chest. He tipped his hat toward the glow, swallowed the last of the dust from the road, and stepped forward. Tom rapped his knuckles on the cabin door and stepped back just enough that the hinges wouldn't kiss his nose if someone threw it open fast. The door swung inward to a slice of lamplight and the dark mouth of a shotgun barrel. Behind it stood a lean woman in a calico dress, sleeves rolled, hair braided tight and tied up with a strip of blue cloth. Her eyes were the color of the creekbed stones gray, watchful, willing to hold their ground. "That smoke yours?" Tom asked, palms plain at his sides. "It is," she said. "And so is the cabin you're standing in front of. My name's Tom Grady." He tipped his hat an inch. "I came to say I'm the new owner of Stonewater." She didn't blink. "You paid money for a headache." "Maybe I did." The shotgun didn't lower. "What do you want, Mr. Grady?" "To talk," he said, "and to do it with both of us a step farther from the part where people get holes put in them." Something in that made the corner of her mouth consider a smile and decide against it. She shifted the gun to easy carry, not aim, and opened the door wider. The room beyond was clean and small table, 2 chairs, a peg with a man's coat on it, a ladder up to a loft. A pot simmered on a stove that had been polished with more care than most men give a saddle. "Ruth Whitlock," she said at last. "My husband's Eli. He's mending a hinge. Come in if you've got decent words. Leave if you don't." Tom stepped across the threshold and pulled the door to with a hand that didn't quite quit shaking. A dog slid out from under the table blue-gray, with one ear torn and a gaze that weighed him like a butcher weighs a roast. The dog's tail didn't move. "He'll mind me," Ruth said. "Mostly." "I'll hope for the mostly." Clatter issued from outside, and a man came in with a handful of nails in his fist and a limp he didn't apologize for. Eli Whitlock was the kind of tall that had lost a few inches to life. His beard had gone to frost at the chin. His left sleeve was rolled to the elbow, showing a burn scar like old lightning down his forearm. He stopped when he saw Tom, took in the hat, the coat, the dust at the cuffs. "Afternoon," Eli said. "You lost?" "Name's Grady," Tom said again. "I bought the town." Eli let the nails ride down into his palm and didn't look at Ruth. "You bought a piece of paper." "That's true," Tom said. "I also bought a broken windmill, a bent steeple, and a lot of wind." Eli's eyes were not the kind that warmed quick, but they were honest. "You can't own this town," he said, voice dry as fence scrap. "We never left. County clerk said there weren't any claimants." "We don't make claims with clerks," Eli said. "We make them with sweat. The clerk never came up here to count." Ruth ladled stew into 3 tin bowls and set them on the table with a plain efficiency that said the matter of ownership would not interrupt supper. She put a 4th bowl down, and the dog took it between his paws and made short work of it where he lay. The smell of the stew goat, onion, scrape of dried chili slicked Tom's throat with want. He didn't reach for a spoon until Ruth nodded that they ate without talking at first, which suited Tom. Eating talked for a man. It said, "I accept your salt. I put your food in my mouth. I think you won't poison me." When the bowls were clean, Ruth refilled the coffee pot, and Eli leaned his hip against the table and finally asked, "What do you plan to do with a ghost town, Mr. Grady?" "Make it less ghost, more town," Tom said. "Run cattle. Fix what'll fix, leave what won't. You a cowman?" "I'm a man who can work," Tom said. "I can set a post straight and make a pump leather hold. I can put a roof back on in a wind that's trying to teach me a lesson. I can dig a post hole in rock. I can count calves. And I can learn the parts I don't know yet." Ruth poured coffee. "You got money to buy cattle?" "Not much," Tom admitted. "Enough to start small. Enough to risk being wrong." Eli scratched his jaw. "Risk is plentiful." A small scuff sounded on the ladder, and a girl came halfway down, then froze when she saw the stranger. She had the same watchful eyes as Ruth and a braid like a rope over one shoulder. Behind her, a boy of 10 peered around the ladder rail with the concentration of a squirrel. The girl climbed down the rest of the way and put herself between Tom and the boy without making it look like she was doing that. "This is Miriam," Ruth said. "That's our Caleb. Say evening, children." Miriam inclined her head, the way a person does who has been taught that politeness is not surrender. Caleb nodded like boys do when they haven't learned how to hide their curiosity yet. The dog finished his bowl and came to sit by Caleb's knee, leaning into him with the weight of something sworn. Tom set his hat on his knee and took the measure of the family. They weren't ghosts. They were not even the kind of stubborn that breaks other people for sport. They had the tired, steady stubborn that holds tight because letting go would mean falling. He recognized it. He had carried it from one job to the next, down every road to here. "How long you been up here alone?" he asked. "Since before the last ore run," Eli said. "Since most everybody went toward Placer Ridge and then farther. Why stay?" Ruth's eyes went to the ceiling, to the loft, to the truss where she'd hung dried beans in their pods, rattling softly when the drafts found them. "Because leaving is its own kind of dying," she said. "Because we got land broke and a garden that remembers our hands. Because we know where the water hides when it pretends to be gone. Because the dead behind the church are ours and don't like to be left." Miriam looked at Tom like she could read him the way she read the weather. "You're here for the windmill," she said, "and the livery, and to make a place that's yours." "Yes," Tom said, plain. "Does your deed say we have to go?" "It says the county sold me a town site," Tom replied. "It didn't say a blessed word about you." The clerk did mention the sheriff. Ruth's mouth set. "Sheriff came once. He took a look around and left us a sack of flour. Told us we were fools and good luck to us anyway. That was 2 winters ago." Tom studied his coffee. The lamplight made a little oily circle in the tin and then broke it when he breathed. He could have said, "I'll bring the sheriff." That would have been a kind of truth. He could have said, "I'll fight you for what a clerk sold me." That would have been another kind of truth. He thought about the pump in front of the mercantile, the way it had moved stiff but willing. He thought about the graves behind the church and the clean oval on the dust where a jar had sat. He thought about the way the basin held evening, like a bowl holds soup and gives it back slowly, and about the voice a town makes when it wants to live. "Tomorrow," he said, "I'm going to tear down what's too broken to keep in stack." What isn't into something useful? If you tell me which structures you use, I'll work around you. Eli's eyebrows climbed, then settled. We use the cabin, he said dry. You've found it. Anything else? The smokehouse. Behind the cooper shop, Ruth said. We keep meat there. The coop, the little pen beyond for the goats. The creek, of course. She paused, choosing her words like nails. We mind the mine. What does that mean? It means we mind it, she said, and left the meaning where it lay. Water? Tom asked. I'll need it if I'm going to fix anything. Stone waters. Got two faces, Eli said. One you can drink, one you can't. The spring up the draw is steady enough if you respect it. The well by the livery will pump if you put the leather right. The creek runs when God remembers us. We have a cistern buried under the yard. Don't walk heavy over it. Caleb slid closer to Tom, boldness breaking free from behind caution. You got a horse? I do, Tom said. And a mule named Bishop who doesn't care for anyone. Caleb lit up. We got mercy and trouble. The goats, Miriam explained, not quite rolling her eyes. Mercy gives a decent quart. Trouble eats shirts. Mine mostly, Caleb admitted, patting the dog with his foot. Ruth wiped the table with a damp rag, as if wiping down words with it too. People come through sometimes, she said. Peddlers, once in a rare while. A surveyor last spring. He said he felt watched and left before coffee got to boil. You thinking of bringing people back? Hands? Buyers? In time, Tom said. First, I have to make Stonewater count for something other than a line in a ledger. A man can't hire help to stand under a falling roof. Eli set the nail he'd been worrying down flat and pressed it with his thumb. You got two hands. I got one good leg and one the fire took a bite out of. Ruth's hands are better than both of ours. The children carry more than they should. If you want to work, there's work enough. I'm not looking to be waited on, Tom said. We're not looking to wait on you, Eli replied. They let that sit. Outside, wind found the cracks in the chinking and sent them a note from the rest of the night. The dog's ears pricked, and then folded again. Ruth poured Tom another coffee, and it felt like they'd passed some test he hadn't known he was taking. Where are you set up? Miriam asked. Back of the livery, he said. Fire, bedroll, a pot of coffee that's doing its best not to shame me. You best keep the fire low, Ruth said, gaze sliding toward the window. Wind turns odd after midnight. Odd how? Just odd. Eli straightened from the table and reached for the coat on the peg. Let's walk, he said. I'll show you what ground you're heavy on, and what ground'll swallow you. They stepped out under a sky that had scattered its stars with both hands. The basin wore night well. It hid the bent roofs and the peeling paint and made every building a clean shape again. Eli moved with the care of a man whose bones had learned to give and not give. He pointed with his chin more than with his hand. That shed lean into it, and it will not thank you. This lane floods every March. The coop's got a fox that argues with Ruth and loses. The cistern's lid is 2 feet under and off to the left from that marker stone. The windmill run if you can bully it true. They stood a while at the pump, and Tom worked the handle. No water came, but he could feel the cylinder try. I can cut a new leather, he said. I got a piece of harness too far gone for pulling, but not too far gone for this. You do that, Eli said, and glanced toward the dark cut of the adit up the slope. He didn't linger on it. He didn't have to. The mind put its own weight into the air. The frame above the entrance had a new grace on one side, fresh wood against old. Someone had kept it from falling out of habit. Not hope. You said the fire took your leg, Tom said finally, not asking but leaving room for correction. Not the fire, Eli said. What came with it? He said no more, and Tom didn't. Push. Some things a man told in his own weather. Back at the cabin, Ruth had set 3 jars on the sill to cool goat milk skimmed thin. A little honey, a scrap of last summer's peaches floating like suns in syrup. She wrapped a loaf of cornbread in a cloth and pressed it into Tom's hands with the stiff generosity of people who know the price of sharing, and do it anyway. You keep to your side of the fence, and we'll keep to ours, she said. If your work crosses us, you say so before it does. If you hear something you don't like after dark, you stay where you are. Is that a warning? Tom asked. It's manners, Ruth said. Miriam stood with Caleb under her elbow like a second. Piece of herself. If you're going to fix the pump tomorrow, I can bring you a bucket, she offered, then glanced at Ruth. Bring him one, Ruth said, and don't go past the bell frame. I won't, Miriam said. To Tom, she added, if you see coyote eyes at the edge of town, they're usually just watching. Usually. Usually, Tom repeated. On his way back through the quiet street, a barn owl skimmed low over his head and stitched itself into the dark beyond the livery. He listened for the mine as if it could speak words. It said only what wind puts in. Anything hollow. He banked his fire small, set his boots where he could find them in a hurry, and put the cornbread on the crate he used for a table, the cloth still holding a little kitchen warmth. He slept in fits and starts, waking to the dogs. Single bark far off, to Bishop stamping and blowing, to the peculiar hush the basin carried at certain hours when even the crickets forgot themselves. Once he dreamed he heard a voice say his name, clear as a bell rung close by. He sat up, heart hitting his ribs like a hand on a door. The fire made a star of the last coal, and nothing else moved. He told himself it had been the owl. Or the wind. Finding his name in the cracks, morning put frost on the pump handle and a pale edge on the roofs. Before the sun made it down the slope, Miriam came across the packed street with a bucket in one hand, the dog glued to her side, and Caleb bobbing. Behind. She set the bucket down like it weighed nothing, which told Tom she'd been carrying water a long time. You'll need this, she said, and then, almost grudgingly, if you're going to fix it right. I aim to, Tom said. He took the bucket and felt the weight of the water, cold through the metal, as real and immediate as any deed paper. Thank you. She tipped her head and was gone before he could find a formality big enough to fit what he felt. Caleb lingered a second longer, towing a mark in the dirt. Bishop really hates everybody? He asked. Give him a chance, Tom said. He might save some hatred special for you. Caleb grinned and sprinted after his sister, the dog running the far side of him, like a shadow that wouldn't be shaken by noon. Tom had the pump leather cut and soaked and set. He worked with his gloves off, fingers raw to the task, listening. To the town's old bones creak and answer. When the handle finally stiffened, and then gave with a grudging sigh, water climbed the column and spilled into the trough in a gurgle that sounded like a laugh held too long. He cupped his hand and drank. It was cold, less bitter than he'd expected, with the mineral taste of a place that has paid for its water dearly. Across the street, Ruth watched from the cabin door, her chin set, her mouth soft. Eli lifted 2 fingers in a salute that wasn't quite congratulations and wasn't quite truce, and Tom returned it. The Whitlocks hadn't asked to be counted. They were counted now anyway, in each pump stroke, in each nail set, in the sound of a bucket ringing full. Tom had bought a town and found a family inside it like a message folded in a book. Whether the message warned or welcomed, he didn't know yet. The wind came down the draw and moved over his face the way a hand checks a fever. He pulled the handle again, and the pump answered, and somewhere up the slope, the mine breathed out a chill that daylight didn't warm. The basin wore autumn like a hand-me-down coat patched with gold, were cottonwoods huddled by the creek, threadbare where wind stripped the grass to pale stubble. Tom had been in Stonewater nearly 3 weeks, fixing what would hold, tearing down what wouldn't, and getting used to the way the Whitlocks lived, as if the rest of the world were something they could choose to let in or keep out. Most days started with the pump and ended with coffee on the crate outside his bedroll. Eli would limp over in the mornings, sometimes to trade tools, sometimes to offer the use of his eyes and experience. Ruth spoke less, but her silences carried weight, approval, disapproval, or warning, depending on their shape. Miriam ranged farther than her mother liked, always with the dog at her heel, while Caleb was a shadow who turned up whenever Tom had a job small hands could help with. It might have gone on like that, quiet and steady, if not for the wind that came out of the hills one late afternoon. Whispers on the ridge. Tom was mending the south paddock fence when he heard it faint, thin, almost swallowed by the gusts. He straightened, hammer in hand, listening. The wind carried plenty of sounds in Stonewater. The high wheeze of loose siding, the hollow moan of the livery roof, the flap and slap of a signboard. But this was different. It was a voice, not the clean, clear call of someone shouting from a distance. This was low, wavering, as if it came from inside something deep and cold. He caught only one word, or maybe only thought he did. Tom. He turned toward the mine. The adit's black mouth sat high on the slope, framed by weather-silvered timbers. Shadows pooling like a dark animal crouched there. Wind, he muttered, and went back to work. But every time a nail set, the voice seemed to slip under the sound, threading his name through the strike of the hammer. By evening, the air had a bite in it. Ruth came to the paddock with a coil of rope over her shoulder. Eli says quit early. Wind's wrong. What's wrong with it? She fixed him with those creekstone eyes. It's been over the mine. Ruth's warning back at the cabin. Eli sat sharpening a draw knife by lamplight. You hear it? He asked without looking up. I heard something, Tom said carefully. That's enough. Eli set the knife aside. When the wind runs through those tunnels, it picks up pieces of what was left there. The more you listen, the more it fits itself to your ear, like a man whittling wood to fit a notch. Tom's instinct was to scoff, but something in Eli's tone, flat, without flourish, kept the words behind his teeth. You mean echoes? I mean things, Eli said. Voices, shadows. Call them what you want. Don't follow them. Miriam was at the table, mending a tear in Caleb's shirt. She didn't look up, but her needle paused. Sometimes they sound like people you know, she said. Sometimes like people you wish you didn't. That's enough, Miriam, Ruth said sharply. The girl bent back to her stitching. The lantern test that night. After the Whitlocks turned in, Tom sat by his low fire and stared toward the mine. The slope was silvered by moonlight, the entrance a hole in the glow. He told himself a man ought to know what was on his own land. He took his lantern and rifle and walked up the switchback path, his boots finding the grooves cut by ore carts decades ago. The closer he got, the colder the air felt, sharp and damp, smelling of stone and something faintly metallic. At the threshold, he lifted the lantern high. The light caught the first set of timbers, then vanished into black. The wind sighed through, lifting the hair on his arms. Tom. The voice was closer now. Not loud, just near. His grip tightened on the rifle. Who's there? No answer. Only the faint shuffle of grit deeper in. He stepped one pace in, boots crunching on the floor. The air thickened, muffling the night sounds outside. The tunnel walls sweated moisture that reflected pinpoints of lantern light, like eyes. And then he saw it, something pale at the edge of the light, a flicker like cloth in a breeze. It moved as if slipping behind a bend. A hand in the dark. Tom's breath came quick. He took another step, then another. The flicker stayed ahead, never fully visible, but always there, until it wasn't. The wind shifted, carrying a smell like scorched hair. A shadow crossed the lantern glass, though nothing had moved between him and the light. He felt, unmistakably, the pressure of a hand on his shoulder. Cold. Heavy. He spun, rifle up. The tunnel was empty, but behind him, from deeper in, came the sound of slow, dragging footsteps retreating into the dark. Retreat? He backed out. Never. Turning his back on the tunnel until the moonlight touched his boots again. The instant he crossed into open air, the wind eased and the smell vanished. From the basin floor, the town looked just as it had when he left, quiet. Lamplit in the Whitlock cabin, roofs hunched against the cold. But he could feel the mine at his back, like eyes watching the slope of his shoulders. When he got to his camp, Ruth was standing by his fire, arms folded. "I told you not to go," she said. "You been watching me?" "Someone has to." Eli's voice came from the shadows behind her. "Now, you know." "Know what?" Tom asked. "That it ain't just wind up there." They left it at that, and for the first time since he'd arrived, Tom found himself wishing the basin wasn't so quiet when the fire went out. The wind didn't change in Stonewater so much as it carried news. After his night at the mine, Tom could tell when it came down the slope that it had passed through the tunnels first, its chill sharper, its sigh slower, as if it had stopped. To listen to something before reaching the basin. He didn't go back up there. Not for a while. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something from inside the mine had followed him back down. Not in the way a man follows another down a trail closer. Than that. Closer like a shadow that doesn't need light. Work in uneasy company, Tom threw himself into repairs, trying to keep his mind fixed on nails and rope and leather washers instead of pale flickers in the dark. He set the south paddock fence straight, cleared the rubble from 2 collapsed storefronts, patched the mercantile roof, and replaced 3 of the windmill vanes. Every now and then Eli would limp over and lend a hand. Ruth would bring a jar of milk, or a loaf wrapped in cloth, and Miriam. Or Caleb would fetch tools like they'd been apprenticed to him from birth. But the quiet moments were the worst. Sometimes, while working alone, Tom would hear the soft clink of stone against stone from somewhere nearby steady, like a miner's pick hitting a seam. The sound never came from the same place twice, and when he turned to look, the street or yard behind him would be empty. Late one afternoon, as the light thinned to amber, Miriam came to where he was setting a gatepost. The dog stayed pressed to her knee. "You heard it again," she said, not asking, telling. "I hear a lot of things," Tom said. "You don't have to pretend with us. We live with it." Ruth's voice carried from the cabin door. "Miriam." The girl lifted her chin at Tom. "Don't follow it. That's how they get you." Then she turned and walked back, the dog glancing over its shoulder twice. Ruth makes it plain 2 nights later. Ruth came to his fire after the Whitlock's cabin had gone dark. She sat on an upturned crate, her hands folded in her lap. "You bought a deed, Mr. Grady, but not everything here is for sale." "I'm starting to figure that out," Tom said. She nodded toward the slope. "Whatever's in that mine doesn't. Like strangers. Doesn't like change either. We've stayed this long because we've learned the rules. Don't go in after dark. Don't answer when it calls. Don't dig where the fire blackened the timbers." Tom studied her face in the firelight. "And you expect me to follow those rules?" "If you plan to live here," she said, "or last here." "Lasting and living aren't always the same thing," Tom said quietly. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You learn fast." She stood, dusting her hands. "We'll help you with the cattle. But you don't bring hands here who'll go poking where they shouldn't. One wrong move, and we're all paying for it." The offer it was Eli who brought the deal to the table. They met in the mercantile on a morning when frost had furred the trough, and the sun still clung to the high ridges. "You want to run cattle, You'll need more fence and winter feed, Eli said. We can help you put up both. In return, we get to keep our land, our cabin, and our way of living. You sell beef, you cut us in. That easy? Tom asked. Nothing here's easy, Eli said. But it's fair. Tom thought of the mine, of the pale thing he'd almost seen, of the hand on his shoulder in the dark. He thought of the Whitlocks, surviving in a place that would chew up anyone who didn't know how to listen to it. And he thought about what Ruth had said about rules and lasting. Deal, Tom said, and they shook on it. A town that breathed through the weeks that followed. Stonewater changed, but only just enough to please both man and place. Tom brought in a small starter herd, grazing them in the low meadows. The Whitlocks helped mend corrals and stack feed. Ruth traded butter and cheese to passing freighters for salt blocks. Miriam rode watch on the cattle with the dog. Caleb took to Bishop with stubborn patience until the mule grudgingly allowed it. The mine stayed quiet, its dark mouth a reminder on the slope. But sometimes, just before dawn, Tom would wake to find the lantern on his crate burning low, though he was certain he'd snuffed it. Other mornings, the pump handle would be wet with cold dew, though no frost had touched the ground. One night, while checking the herd under a sliver moon, Tom saw lights moving high on the ridge small, flickering, shifting in and out of sight. They weren't lanterns, not the way they swayed and floated. He didn't follow. The whisper that stayed winter came with long nights and a wind that scoured the basin clean. Stonewater endured 2 families now, bound by work, profit, and something unspoken. The cattle grew through the lean months, the fences held, and the roofs stayed on in the gales. But the whisper never left. Sometimes it came on the wind, sometimes in the stillness before sleep. Tom. Always his name, always just close enough to hear. He never answered, and when it came from the direction of the mine, he would tip his hat toward the slope and say softly into the dark, "Evening, friend. We're still here."